4:47 a.m. Desert Palm Motel, Whittle Springs, Tennessee. 22 federal agents and Tennessee Bureau of Investigation officers cross a rain-slicked parking lot in 3 simultaneous columns. No sirens. No lights. The breach teams hit Room 7, Room 12, and the back office at the same second. This coordination was deliberate. It had been rehearsed 19 times in the previous 2 weeks. At the parking lot's south end, a man in a gray hoodie reaches for the door of a blue pickup truck. He doesn't get there. 2 US Marshals have him face down on the hood before his fingers touch it. He doesn't resist. Cuffed in 11 seconds. Inside Room 12, the lead agent's ram connects with the door at 4:47 and 0 seconds. The door doesn't open. There's a second deadbolt above the first. Installed without a permit, without a maintenance record, without any notation in the motel's management log. The team hits it again. The second strike splinters the upper frame. 4 agents pour in. Tactical lights sweep a standard motel room. 2 queen beds. A television. A carpet last replaced before most of the agents were at the academy. The bathroom is standard. The mirror above the sink is mounted on plywood, 4 screws visible, 1 turning freely when touched. One of the agents applies pressure to the right edge of the plate. It swings inward on a piano hinge. Behind it, a plywood panel with a recessed handle. The panel opens onto a room that doesn't appear on any floor plan filed with Knox County. 17 young women. Some standing. Some seated on metal cots along the walls. All looking at the agents in the doorway. This is what a murder investigation looks like when investigators follow the thread all the way to the end. What brought those 22 agents to that parking lot began 8 months earlier in a different county, over a different crime. November 14th, 2025. Grainger County, Tennessee. A property dispute between 2 men escalates past words on a gravel driveway off State Route 322. It ends with 1 man on the ground and the other gone. The Grainger County Sheriff's Office dispatcher receives the 911 call at 9:14 p.m. The first deputy reaches the scene at 9:31. The shooter is identified within 24 hours as Colt Harwick, 29, no fixed address, 1 prior conviction for receiving stolen property. He's not at the scene. He's been gone long enough that tire tracks from his vehicle are beginning to blur in the overnight rain. Harwick had no obvious reason to stay in Grainger County after November 14th. No property. No lease. No documented family. What he had was a network of people who owed him favors, wanted his proximity, or were connected to something larger. A person with that kind of network doesn't hide in the woods. He slides into a space prepared for exactly this need. He goes somewhere off the formal record. He waits. By November 18th, Grainger County had exhausted what it could do on its own. Harwick's phone data obtained from the carrier under a 24-hour emergency request showed both registered numbers pinging towers in Knox County on the evening of November 15th. After that, both numbers went dark. No location pings. No data requests. No application activity. He'd either moved to a 3rd device or stopped using cellular communication. Either way, the electronic trail was gone. The US Marshals Gulf Coast Regional Fugitive Task Force accepted the Grainger County referral on November 18th. The case went to a 4-person cell. Deputy Marshal Sandra Keene drew lead. Keene had worked fugitive cases for 11 years. She'd been involved in apprehending 47 individuals on federal and state most wanted lists, 7 of them in Tennessee. She understood the profile. A fugitive with a network goes to ground fast, and the longer he stays hidden, the harder he becomes to locate, because the people sheltering him normalize the arrangement. They stop thinking of it as hiding someone. They start thinking of it as hosting a very quiet house guest. Keene had roughly 2 weeks before the trail went genuinely cold. She used those 2 weeks to build a picture of where Harwick had been in the 6 months before November 14th. The historical phone data covered his movements from May through early November 2025. It showed a man operating between 2 geographic anchors. Rural Grainger County, where he had loose employment records doing agricultural contracting and occasional mechanical work, and a specific corridor of West Knox County, the commercial strip along US 11W, through an interchange locals call Whittle Springs, where his phone consistently pinged towers in the same half-mile radius twice a week. Always in the late evening. Always between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. The Whittle Springs corridor is what developers call a highway commercial zone, and what everyone else calls a truck stop strip. Budget motels, convenience stores, a chain tire shop, a closed diner with plywood on the windows. The kind of geography that operates around the clock and doesn't ask questions. Harwick's location data placed him on the east side of the interchange. Satellite imagery showed 3 candidate properties within his range. A self-storage facility on the north side of the road, the shuttered diner, and a 22-room single-story motel with exterior siding, the color of old concrete, and a sign in orange neon that read, Desert Palm Motel. Keene noted the address. She flagged it as a possible address of convenience. She moved on to the rest of the investigative checklist. She had no basis yet to treat it as anything other than a place a fugitive might have slept. That assessment was about to be tested in a way she had not anticipated. By December 2025, the Harwick investigation had stalled. 7 weeks after the Grainger County shooting, the task force cell had produced 17 tips, 0 confirmed sightings, and 1 address in Morristown that came back clean. The cousin was present, cooperative, and showed investigators the guest room. Stripped mattress. No personal effects. No sign of recent occupation. Harwick had been there according to a confidential informant, but he was gone. He'd moved before they arrived. The phones were still dark. Witnesses in Grainger County had closed ranks. Physical surveillance of Harwick's known Knox County contacts produced no sighting in 3 weeks. The investigation wasn't dead, but it wasn't moving. On January 9, 2026, an anonymous tip arrived through the US Marshals tip line. The caller stayed on for 41 seconds. The information, a man matching Harwick's description, had been seen within the previous week at a motel in Whittle Springs, entering through the back stairwell. The Desert Palm Motel didn't have a back stairwell. It was a single-story building. Keene pulled the physical layout from Knox County records. L-shaped structure. Single floor. No stairwell. The tipster had either confused the Desert Palm with another property or deliberately seeded the tip with a false detail. The kind of misdirection that sounds plausible unless you check the building plans, that burns investigative time when agents search for a stairwell that doesn't exist. The motel name was real. The stairwell wasn't. That combination is a specific kind of noise. Someone connected to the Desert Palm or to Harwick was paying attention. Someone had called in a partial truth with a falsifiable element built in. Keene went back to an intersection camera request she'd filed in December. The footage had cleared. She pulled 43 days of data from a camera at the US 11W and Bridgewater crossing signal. The Desert Palm's parking lot entrance was visible in the upper right quadrant. She reviewed 27 hours of footage over 2 evenings. On 14 separate nights between mid-November and late December 2025, a gray Jeep Cherokee appeared at the Desert Palms lot. Registered to a limited liability company at a UPS store address in North Knoxville. The pattern was consistent. Arrival between 10:30 p.m. and midnight. Departure between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. The Jeep always parked in the same spot, nose into the building, in the row closest to room 12. I spent an afternoon working through those footage logs, and one detail kept returning. The driver never entered room 12 directly. He walked to the door. He stood there for roughly 10 seconds each time. Then the footage cut to a slightly different camera angle and he disappeared. The parking lot camera had a blind spot, an elevation and angle that placed room 12's door behind the adjacent vehicle. Whoever parked the Jeep there did so in a way that consistently used that gap. Knowing the blind spot requires studying it. People don't study a motel parking lot camera's coverage unless they have a specific reason. Keene flagged the LLC. A registered agent search showed a company formed in March 23. No public business activity. A UPS store mailing address. No employees on record. No state revenue filings. It had paid a Knox County business license fee in February 2024 and filed nothing after. The entity existed to hold an asset or manage an address. Nothing else. She submitted a formal surveillance request for the Desert Palm on January 29, 2026. It was approved in 4 days. On February 3, 2026, 2 task force vehicles took positions on the commercial strip within line of sight of the Desert Palm. Civilian plates. Long-range optical equipment. Rotation was every 8 hours. Every vehicle entering and leaving got photographed. Every plate got run. Standard close physical surveillance. Cold nights. 8-hour shifts. A lot of documenting and waiting. For the first 11 days, the surveillance confirmed what Keene already knew from the intersection camera and added one new variable. A white cargo van arrived at the Desert Palm service entrance every 4 to 5 days, registered to a second shell entity unconnected to the LLC behind the Jeep. The service entrance ran through a narrow driveway alongside the motel's north wall. The van appeared at the surveillance frame's edge, turned into the driveway, and disappeared. Its departure times fell in the pre-dawn window, always between midnight and 4 a.m. The surveillance team requested a secondary position on February 14th. That required a property access agreement with the self-storage facility owner across the road. He had to be briefed under a non-disclosure protocol. 4 days for that process. Weather in the Whittle Springs corridor dropped to 9 degrees Fahrenheit on the 14th. Ice on the roads halted vehicle movement for roughly 18 hours and forced the surveillance rotation to suspend. By February 19th, the secondary position on the storage facility roof was operational. At 2:11 that afternoon, the officer with the long-range lens logged what would become the most consequential observation of the entire investigation. Room 12's door was visible from the rooftop. The officer was documenting the parking lot in standard rotation when he noted the door hardware. The deadbolt was installed backwards. The keyed cylinder, the component requiring a key, was on the interior side. The thumb turn, the component used from inside to lock or unlock, was on the exterior side. Room 12 could be locked from the outside with a key. It couldn't be deadbolted from the inside by the person inside it. The observation was filed at 4:12 p.m. By 4:45, Keene had read it. By 6 p.m., she was on the phone with Homeland Security Investigations, Knoxville Field Office. Here's what most people would assume at this point. A reverse deadbolt immediately triggers a rescue operation. It didn't. And understanding why matters for understanding how federal law actually works. The deadbolt was anomalous. It was disturbing. But a single piece of reverse door hardware isn't, by itself, evidence of a crime inside the room. A previous tenant could have made the modification. The room could have been converted to secure storage for cleaning supplies. Without corroborating evidence, a reverse deadbolt doesn't meet the evidentiary standard a federal magistrate in the Eastern District of Tennessee requires to issue a search warrant. What it supported was an application to expand the investigation and obtain additional records. Keene filed that application on February 20th. She requested co-lead status for HSI Knoxville, expanded surveillance covering the service entrance and the white van, and a utility subpoena directed at the Knox County Utilities Authority for all metered consumption at the Desert Palm. The utility records came back in 8 days. They covered October 2025 through January 2026. Room 12's electrical consumption for that period averaged 193 kilowatt hours per month. Room 7, immediately adjacent on the same wing, averaged 84. The corridor average for all rooms in the wing was 76 kilowatt hours, 193 kilowatt hours per month. In a room that the front desk check-in log showed was occupied for fewer than 11 nights in the entire 4-month period. Occupied for 11 nights and drawing enough electricity each month to run a small apartment. There is no explanation for that figure that doesn't involve a significant additional electrical load pulling from Room 12's circuit. Climate control for a larger space. Additional lighting. Equipment running continuously. The utility data didn't tell investigators what was behind the wall. It confirmed that something was, drawing power every day, regardless of whether Room 12 appeared occupied. The most surprising part of this case isn't the reverse deadbolt. It isn't the utility bill. It's the combination. Either anomaly in isolation probably wouldn't have generated sufficient evidentiary traction. Together, they gave Keene the basis to walk into a federal magistrate's chambers and ask for the document that would change everything. The original Knox County building permit for the Desert Palm Motel. The permit warrant was signed on March 4, 2026. The task force had the original construction drawings the following morning. The Desert Palm was built in 1991. The original filing listed a 22-room structure with a standard L-shaped single-story footprint. Room 12 was recorded at 320 square feet. The back wall of Room 12 was documented as a standard interior partition, flush with the building's structural footprint. The surveillance team measured the building's actual eastern exterior wall using laser range-finding equipment from the storage facility rooftop. The measurement was taken on 3 separate occasions by 2 different operators to confirm it wasn't equipment error. All 3 measurements were consistent within 4 inches. The wall extended roughly 42 feet beyond the position where Room 12's back wall, per the original permit, should have been. 42 feet. Not filed with any permit. Not reflected in any Knox County tax assessment. Not accessible through any exterior door on the building's east face. Not registered in any utility hookup separate from Room 12's circuit. Behind Room 12's bathroom, behind a wall that the permit showed as the building's terminal edge, there was an additional space. 42 feet deep. 18 feet wide. Drawing power from Room 12's circuit every day of the year. Officially, it didn't exist. The Joint Task Force was formally constituted on March 9, 2026. HSI Knoxville assumed co-lead status. 2 TBI agents joined the cell. The primary objective remained on the board, locating Colt Harwick. But the unreported extension behind Room 12 was now the reason the entire investigative apparatus of a joint federal task force was committed to a 22-room budget motel on the Whittle Springs commercial strip. What's striking about this phase of the investigation is what it required from everyone involved. From the moment Keene first noted the Desert Palm as a possible address in November 2025, to the moment the structural discrepancy was confirmed in early March 2026. That's 3.5 months. 3.5 months of tips, surveillance requests, weather delays, record subpoenas, and legal filings, all building toward a warrant for a building permit from 1991. Law enforcement doesn't move on instinct. It moves on evidence, and collecting enough of it, in the right sequence, with proper documentation, takes the time it takes. Through March and into April 2026, the Joint Task Force built the evidentiary foundation it would need to enter Room 12 lawfully and to prosecute whoever was responsible for what they believed they would find inside it. The white cargo van's registration traced through 2 intermediary shell entities to a man named Wade Seibert, 41 years old. His Knox County business registration listed his occupation as property management consultant. No prior criminal record. No known association with Colt Harwick in any database. He was the registered agent for the LLC that held the Desert Palms lease, signed in March 2023, approximately 1 year after the extension's estimated construction. Seibert had been managing the property for 3 years. A financial subpoena directed to his personal banking institution, served in April 26, showed an income pattern inconsistent with property management work. His primary checking account received regular cash deposits, never exceeding $9,900 per transaction, every 12 to 17 days, over the preceding 22 months. The total deposited exceeded $380,000. His documented expenses were modest. The motel lease, vehicle costs, utilities, food. The gap between what was coming in and what was being spent wasn't random. It was a schedule. The deposits were structured, regular, and sized to avoid automatic federal reporting triggers. That's not how an ordinary property manager gets paid. That's how a person accepts payment for something they need to keep off the formal record. The task force submitted a second financial warrant in late April, covering the LLC's operating accounts. Those returns showed similar patterns, different accounts, and an additional holding entity that traced to an address in Georgia. A post office box in a county outside Atlanta opened in 2022 that had never received identifiable mail beyond account statements. The Georgia connection was flagged and logged. It couldn't, at that point, be connected to a specific individual. The investigation's co-conspirator thread, the person or organization above Seibert who managed the operation and who presumably arranged for the extension's construction before Seibert arrived, was an open question. Did investigators move fast enough once the deadbolt was documented, or should they have sought the structural plans sooner? That question has no simple answer. Each step had to support the next. That's both the protection the law offers and the pace it imposes. Put yourself in Sandra Keene's position through April 26. You have a fugitive warrant for a Grainger County homicide. You have a surveillance operation on a budget motel. You have a reverse deadbolt, a utility anomaly, a 42-foot structural discrepancy, a shell company property manager with cash deposits structured to avoid reporting, and a cargo van making pre-dawn service calls. You haven't yet, lawfully, seen the inside of the extension. You don't know for certain what's there. But the evidence points in one direction. And every day spent building the legal case is a day in which whatever is behind that mirror panel remains behind it. The task force's debate about when to move lasted from early April until late June 2026. The tactical question was straightforward. If they moved on the Desert Palm before Harwick was accounted for, they'd execute the operation with the primary fugitive target at large. He'd learn of the raid and go permanently underground. The Grainger County homicide case would lose its most direct path to prosecution. The counter-argument was equally clear. Every additional day of delay was a day of potential exposure. If anyone connected to the Desert Palms operation noticed the surveillance, the occupants of the unreported extension could be moved. Once moved, investigators would have no direct evidence of what had been there, no victims to testify, and a case built on structural measurements and utility bills that wouldn't, by itself, close a prosecution. The debate was resolved on June 24, 2026, when a task force observer caught a 2-second image through a gap in the Desert Palm's eastern exterior siding. The gap was roughly 3 inches wide, consistent with a ventilation louver that had partially separated. Through it, partially obscured by angle and distance, a hand was visible against the interior wall. A woman's hand, palm pressed flat, as though resting against the surface. The image was ambiguous. It wasn't definitive proof. The gap was too narrow and the distance too great for clear, independent evidence. But it was the first direct observation, not inferred from measurements or utility consumption, that a person was inside the unreported extension. It was enough. The task force supervisor made the decision on June 25th. No more waiting for Harwick on his own timetable. An emergency breach warrant would be obtained. The operation would move on the next tactically optimal window. Harwick himself resolved the timing. On the evening of June 30th, a surveillance asset spotted him at a convenience store 4 miles north of the Desert Palm, making purchases and heading back to a vehicle consistent with his known pattern. He was heading south on US 11W, toward the motel for the night. The task force activated at 10 p.m. on June 30th. 93 personnel across 2 counties. The breach was set for 4:47 in the morning. July 1st, 2026. 4:46 and 52 seconds. A mobile command post sat behind the closed diner across from the Desert Palm, with direct sightline to all 3 entry points. The ice machine outside room 7 hummed steadily. Temperature 71 degrees. Humidity 83%. The pre-dawn sky over Whittle Springs was dark enough that the orange neon of the Desert Palm sign was the brightest object on the strip. The breach command activated all 3 elements simultaneously. Element Alpha went to room 7. Harwick wasn't in his room when Alpha hit the door. He was in the parking lot, moving toward the blue pickup truck at the lot's south end. 2 marshals came around either side of the vehicle and had him down before he completed a step. He didn't reach for his waistband. He didn't attempt to run. He went face down on the hood. Cuffed at 4:47 and 12 seconds. 14-month fugitive hunt. 11 seconds to end it. Charlie hit the administrative block. Seibert was there, asleep on a folding cot. He woke 2 agents in his doorway. He didn't speak. He was cuffed sitting up on the cot and walked out at 4:48. The white cargo van was parked in the service driveway, unlocked and secured for evidence. Element Bravo hit room 12 at 4:47 and 0 seconds. The door had 2 deadbolts. The reversed one the surveillance had observed from the storage facility rooftop, and a second standard deadbolt added above it without permit or maintenance record. The ram took 2 strikes. On the second, the upper frame splintered and the door opened. Tactical lights moved across a standard motel interior. 2 made beds. A closed suitcase near the window. No personal effects. No visible occupant. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and something underneath it, a close, sealed undercurrent the agents didn't immediately categorize. The bathroom. Sink. Toilet. Shower with a plastic curtain. Above the sink, mounted on plywood, a standard mirror with 4 screws visible, the lower right one turning freely. The backing plate was hinged on the right side, behind the mirror's frame. An agent applied pressure to the left side. The plate swung inward. Behind it, a plywood panel, roughly 30 inches wide and 60 inches tall, with a recessed pull handle. He pulled the handle. The panel opened. The space beyond had no natural light. A single commercial fluorescent fixture ran the ceiling's length, humming. Unfinished drywall, painted white, on all 4 walls, no markings, no decor. Finished concrete floor, sealed and painted gray. Along the left wall, 7 metal cots, folded blankets on each. Along the right wall, 7 more. At the far end, past a partial dividing wall creating a 3rd section. 3 additional cots. A utility sink in the far corner. 2 portable toilets screened by a curtain. A folding table near the entrance. On the table, a battery-powered clock. The clock read 4:49. 17 young women, ages 22 to 28. Some standing, some on the cots sitting upright. One at the far end, with her back to the entrance. Most facing the open panel, looking at the agents. The first agent lowered his rifle to low ready. US Marshals. You're safe. We're here to help you. The woman standing nearest the panel, arms at her sides, wearing clean clothes worn many times, looked at the agent. She said 4 words. Is it over now? Medical personnel entered the extension at 4:51 a.m. Triage began immediately. 2 of the 17 required transport for conditions consistent with prolonged confinement and dehydration. Both were in ambulances by 5:10 a.m. and at the University of Tennessee Medical Center in Knoxville by 5:32. The remaining 15 were assessed on site and transported in stages over the following 90 minutes. The last transport departed at 6:44 a.m. Agents processing the extension found, on the folding table near the entrance, a cardboard box containing 17 folded pieces of paper. Each had a single name written on it in ballpoint pen. First names only. Within the following 24 hours, investigators confirmed that each name corresponded to a missing persons report filed across Tennessee and North Carolina over a period beginning in early February 2026 through mid-May. Some of the women had been inside for fewer than 60 days. The woman standing nearest the panel when the agents entered had been reported missing 147 days earlier. Beneath those 17 papers, in the same cardboard box, agents found a second set. Blank. Folded. 14 of them. Ready. The box had been prepared with space for more names. Elena Voss, 24, had been reported missing from Sevierville, Tennessee, on February 9, 2026. Her fiancé had maintained a missing persons social media page continuously for 5 months. He had posted as recently as June 28th. The family liaison team at the mobile command post called him at 6:17 a.m. on July 1st. The call lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He didn't speak for the first 45 of those seconds. Diane Merritt, 26, was a registered nurse at a regional medical center in Asheville, North Carolina. She hadn't arrived for her Monday morning shift on January 27, 2026. Her charge nurse filed the missing persons report after 3 days of no contact. On the morning of July 1st at 6:41 a.m., Diane Merritt walked out of the Desert Palm Motel under her own power, with a federal agent on either side. She stopped at the parking lot's edge and looked at the orange neon of the motel sign. Then she asked if someone could call her mother. 11 additional families received calls from the liaison team between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m. on July 1st. The remaining 4 required an additional day of identification work and jurisdictional coordination before their families could be contacted. Here's an honest accounting. The systems that should have detected what was happening at the Desert Palm earlier: routine commercial property inspection, utility consumption monitoring, the basic requirement that a building's physical footprint match its registered floor plan, those systems didn't fail catastrophically. They simply didn't connect. No single agency had visibility across all the relevant data at once. The utility authority knew about Room 12's consumption but had no investigative mandate. The Knox County Permitting Office held the original drawings but had no mechanism for comparing them against a current exterior measurement. The motel's front desk manager knew Room 12 was permanently off limits but had no reason to think that detail pointed toward anything requiring a 911 call. The network operating the Desert Palm exploited not one systemic failure, but the accumulation of ordinary institutional gaps, each one individually defensible, together forming a corridor through which this operated for years without triggering a response. It took a murder in Grainger County, a fugitive warrant, 43 days of intersection camera footage, a reversed deadbolt observed through a long-range lens from a storage facility rooftop, and 5 months of joint federal investigation to connect those gaps into a picture that could be acted on legally. The question isn't whether the Desert Palm should have been found sooner. It's an honest accounting of why the combination of circumstances required to find it was as unlikely as it was. Wade Seibert was arraigned in federal court in the Eastern District of Tennessee on July 3, 2026. The indictment includes charges of conspiracy, coercion, unlawful transportation, and obstruction, a combined maximum exposure exceeding 60 years. He's entered a plea of not guilty. His attorney has stated that Seibert contests the characterization of his role. He hasn't provided investigators with information about the white van's arrivals and departures. He hasn't addressed the Georgia post office box. He hasn't named the individual above him. Colt Harwick faces the original Grainger County homicide charge pending in state court, and federal charges arising from his documented operational role at the Desert Palm. The federal indictment describes his function as a material participant with established knowledge of the extension and its occupants. His trial date hasn't been set. His attorney has not commented publicly. Cheryl Papp, the Desert Palm's front desk manager since 2024, was not charged. She provided full cooperation. Access to the property management system. Room 12 check-in records going back 2.5 years. A detailed account of Seibert's instructions regarding that room, which she described as consistent and non-negotiable from her first day. Room 12 was never to be rented. Never to be entered by motel staff. Never to appear on any occupancy log. If a guest asked about it, she was to say it was out of service for maintenance. She had followed those instructions for 2 years. She said she'd assumed the room held something legally sensitive, possibly a dispute between prior owners, possibly equipment for building management. She hadn't asked. She stated this not as an excuse, but as a fact, and investigators recorded it as such. The structural analysis commissioned by the Joint Task Force in the days following the breach established that the 42-foot extension was built between early 2022 and mid-2023. That timeline predates Seibert's lease assumption by roughly 6 to 12 months. The extension wasn't built for Seibert. It was built before he arrived, presumably for the person or organization that subsequently brought him in. Seibert wasn't the origin of the operation. He was a layer of it. The contractor or contractors who performed the construction, the framing, the drywall, the electrical wiring, tapped into Room 12's circuit, the HVAC modification, the piano hinge and panel concealment system, haven't been identified. The work was done with technical precision that left no permit trail, no contact with licensed tradespeople whose records would appear in state licensing databases, and no physical anomaly visible from outside until a task force officer with specific measurement equipment confirmed the exterior wall's dimensions from a rooftop 400 feet away. The white cargo van made a minimum of 31 documented visits to the service entrance over the recorded surveillance period. On 6 of those visits, vehicle weight analysis of axle load measurements from surveillance imagery suggests the van departed heavier than it arrived, indicating that cargo was loaded at the service entrance rather than delivered. The nature of that cargo and its destination haven't been established. Seibert has declined to address those visits. His attorney has stated that no further cooperation will be offered prior to trial. One detail stayed with the investigators who processed the extension in the hours after the breach. The battery-powered clock on the folding table had been reset recently, within the previous few days based on its battery charge level. Someone had maintained it. Someone with access to the extension had been inside within 72 hours of the breach and had set the clock to the correct time. That person isn't among those in custody. That person hasn't been identified. The investigation into the unindicted co-conspirator above Seibert, the individual connected to the Georgia post office box, to the construction of the extension, to the van logistics that the evidence strongly suggests extended beyond the Desert Palm, remains active as of this report. The 17 women reported missing across Tennessee and North Carolina are home. The Desert Palm Motel has been posted with federal seizure notices and closed. The orange neon sign came down on the afternoon of July 1st, removed by a Knox County utilities crew. The extension behind Room 12, 42 feet of unfinished white drywall, 17 metal cots, a utility sink, a folding table, and a battery-powered clock, remains intact and sealed under the Federal Evidence Preservation Order. It will remain sealed until the cases against Seibert and Harwick reach their conclusion in court. The thread that investigators pulled was a murder warrant for a Grainger County shooting. A man running from one crime had placed himself close enough to another that following him, step by step, through 7 weeks of stalled leads and a reversed parking lot camera blind spot and a rooftop observation on a 9-degree February morning, led investigators through a bathroom mirror and into a room no one was supposed to know existed. The contractor who built it hasn't been found. The co-conspirator above Seibert hasn't been named. The cargo the van was loading and where it went remain unresolved. The 14 blank folded papers in the cardboard box have been cataloged and retained as evidence. The room is sealed. The network that built